You were kind, you were patient, you gave more than you had. And still, they overlooked you. Maybe they dismissed your words. Maybe they took advantage of your time. Or maybe they just didn't care. And here's the part that stings the most. You weren't trying to get anything. You weren't looking for recognition. You just thought, somewhere deep down, that being good was enough. That if you kept showing up, kept forgiving, kept understanding, the world would turn around and finally say, I see you, I respect you, you matter. But it never did. And now you're left wondering, what went wrong? Let me tell you something most people won't. The world doesn't reward kindness. It exploits it. It smiles at it, nods at it, even claps for it sometimes. But when it comes down to respect, to real power, real influence, real presence in the room, kindness alone doesn't carry weight. Because in the world's eyes, kindness without backbone is just another way of saying, easy to ignore. And this is where the Stoics come in. Stoicism wasn't built for comfort. It wasn't written in temples or safe places. It was written by emperors at war, slaves in chains, senators facing death. Men who knew what it meant to live under pressure, to be misunderstood, to be betrayed, and still remain calm. Still remain themselves. They didn't teach people how to be liked. They taught them how to be unshakable. Let's start with a truth that's hard to swallow. People don't respect what's easily available. And most kind people, they're always available. For everyone, for everything. No boundaries, no cost, no resistance, just open hands. You want to know what Marcus Aurelius respected? Not smiles, not politeness. He respected virtue, character, restraint, discipline, the kind of quiet force that didn't need to shout or prove itself. He once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, "Be a nice person." He didn't say, "Keep everyone happy." He said, "Be good." And that's not the same, because good, true Stoic good, isn't about being agreeable. It's about being aligned with nature, with principle, with strength, even if the world doesn't applaud it, especially then. Here's what they don't teach you. The more agreeable you are, the more invisible you become. Not because people are cruel, but because they're wired to respond to signals of strength. And kindness without clarity? That doesn't read as strength. It reads as softness. We live in a world that confuses stillness with weakness, that mistakes patience for passivity, that sees calm and calls it cowardice, until it meets someone who has both kindness and teeth. That's the Stoic model. Let me tell you about Epictetus. He was born a slave, property, owned. And yet, he taught emperors. He stood in front of the most powerful men in Rome and spoke like their equal. Not because he demanded it, not because he shouted for attention, but because his self-respect was unshakable. He said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And that's the lesson. Not to stop being kind, but to stop being kind without being sovereign. Kindness without sovereignty is a mask. It's a defense mechanism, a survival tool, a way of saying, "Don't hurt me. I'm safe, I'm useful, I'll make it easy for you." And the truth is, most people sense it. They may not say it out loud, but they feel it, and they lose respect. You see, kindness isn't supposed to be the default. It's supposed to be a choice, a conscious act, a generous risk. And if it's not backed by values, it becomes currency. People stop valuing. The Stoics didn't offer their goodness to everyone. They guarded their time. They guarded their energy. They didn't raise their voices often, but when they did, it mattered. Because they didn't speak to be liked. They spoke to be heard. Now I want you to ask yourself something and answer honestly. When you say yes to things that drain you, when you let someone talk over you for the 5th time, When you keep explaining yourself to people who've already made up their mind, is that kindness? Or is that fear wearing kindness like a costume? This might hurt, but you need to hear it. Not everyone deserves your softness. Not every situation needs your understanding. And not every conflict is yours to de-escalate. The Stoic doesn't avoid conflict. He just refuses to be owned by it. This world doesn't need more people pleasers. It needs more principled warriors, quiet ones, composed ones, but firm, steady, clear on who they are and what they will not allow. Seneca put it best: "He who is everywhere is nowhere." So when your kindness is scattered, when it's given out like water in a flood, it loses shape. It drowns everything, including your own identity. What's the solution? Restraint, not withdrawal, not bitterness, just Stoic restraint. Give your kindness like a blade, not a blanket. Sharp, purposeful, controlled. You are not here to make everyone comfortable. You're here to be in harmony with nature, with reason, with your own soul. That's what the Stoics would say. And the moment you live by that standard, whether the world applauds or not, you begin to earn respect, not through noise, not through perfection, but through presence. Because presence, true grounded presence, is louder than any performance. And that's the beginning of your transformation. Now, let's keep going. Let's go deeper. Because this isn't just about how others treat you. This is about what happens when you finally stop begging the world to see you and start seeing yourself. Let's talk about the quiet punishment of being nice. Because it's real, and it doesn't show up like a slap in the face. It shows up in the slow erosion of how people treat you. It shows up in the way your voice gets talked over, in how your time gets taken for granted, in the silence that follows your effort. At first, it feels like something you can brush off. They're just busy. I probably didn't explain it well. Maybe I need to be more patient. But then it happens again, and again, and one day you realize being the nice one never earned you what you thought it would. Not respect, not reciprocity, not peace. It earned you invisibility. Because here's the ugly truth. People subconsciously respect what resists them, what pushes back, what stands its ground. And when your kindness never resists, never says no, never demands better, it teaches the world a lesson that you're negotiable, that your needs are flexible, that you'll tolerate anything as long as you can keep the peace. But Stoicism doesn't teach peacekeeping. It teaches self-possession. The Stoic doesn't need applause. He doesn't chase validation. He doesn't soften himself just to be more palatable. He stands in silence if necessary. And when he speaks, it's not to please, it's to reveal. Now let's go deeper into the mechanics of it. Why exactly does the world recoil from kind people? Because kindness, when unguarded, sets an expectation. It tells people, you can take from me, and I won't push back. And that kind of dynamic is like gravity. It pulls hard and fast. It invites users, manipulators, and charmers. People who see your openness not as virtue, but as access, and eventually, as weakness. But what happens when that kindness is rooted in discipline? What happens when it's not a reflex, but a rule? That's when it becomes powerful. That's when it becomes Stoic. Marcus Aurelius didn't walk around Rome trying to be liked. He didn't sugarcoat his judgments. But he was fair. He was reasonable. He was known for being just, not nice. That's what lasts. Because kindness that's guided by boundaries becomes something far more respected, integrity. And that's where most people fall. They confuse being liked with being honorable. They confuse saying yes with being supportive. They confuse never disagreeing with being wise. But the Stoic knows real strength has nothing to prove. Let me tell you something most people won't admit. Kindness without truth is manipulation. If you're saying yes when you mean no, If you're staying quiet when your values are being violated, if you're pretending to agree just to avoid tension, that's not virtue. That's fear. The Stoics rejected fear in all its forms, especially the fear of disapproval, because they understood something timeless. You cannot live a principled life if you're owned by how others feel about you. So ask yourself, are you really being kind? Or are you being afraid of confrontation? Are you being compassionate? Or are you terrified of rejection? There's a difference. Let me paint a picture. Imagine a person who never says no. They're the first to help, the last to leave. They apologize when others mess up. They bend until they break. Everyone calls them a really good person, but no one listens when they speak. No one protects their time. And when they finally crack, when they finally set a boundary, people get angry, offended, confused. Why? Because that person trained the world to believe their kindness came without limits. And then one day, they decided it didn't. But it was too late. The Stoic avoids this trap, not by being cruel, but by being clear, by giving their yes with thought, their time with purpose, their compassion with strength. You see, boundaries aren't walls, they're signals. They tell the world where the sacred things begin, and if you don't set them, the world will walk through you like an open door. That's why Epictetus said, "Know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly." Because kindness without identity is just performance, but kindness grounded in character, that's sacred. That's Stoic. So if you've spent your life trying to be kind, to be good, to be what everyone needed, and it left you drained, overlooked, or disrespected, it's not because the world is broken. It's because you were never taught how to carry your kindness with authority. And that's what Stoicism gives you. The blueprint, not to stop being good, but to start being respected for it. We're not done, because this goes even deeper. We need to talk about how your relationship with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship in your life. You teach the world how to treat you, and it all begins with what you tolerate in silence. So let's go there. Let's talk about what happens when your self-respect becomes louder than your need to be liked, because that's the shift. That's when everything changes. Let's talk about the most important relationship in your life, the one that determines how every other relationship unfolds. It's not with your parents, not your partner, not your boss, your friends, or your audience. It's with yourself. That quiet dialogue in your own head. That invisible contract you hold with your values, your time, your standards. That's the source of everything. Because people don't treat you based on who you are. They treat you based on who you show them you are. And if you show them that your time has no boundary, if you show them that your presence comes without self-respect, if you show them that your silence is a form of surrender, not strength, they'll follow that lead, not because they're cruel, but because humans respond to cues. We calibrate based on what others permit. And if you're constantly giving people access without cost, permission without clarity, and forgiveness without standards, you're training them. And worse, you're training yourself. Because every time you betray your own boundaries to keep someone else comfortable, you chip away at the one thing Stoicism fights to preserve, your inner integrity. Now let's go deeper. What does it actually mean to respect yourself? It's not a feeling. It's not a motivational phrase. Self-respect is a discipline, a code, a private agreement between you and your principles. The Stoics didn't just talk about values, they practiced them in silence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." In other words, what you allow inside becomes who you are. So if your thoughts are always about keeping others happy, if your mind is a constant loop of, what will they think? How do I explain myself? How do I keep the peace? Then your soul becomes dyed with insecurity, with hesitation, with self-betrayal. But if your thoughts are rooted in truth, in clarity, in simplicity, in what is right over what is easy, then you build something else. You build quiet strength. And here's where most kind people fall short. They think self-respect comes after they've proved themselves, after they've given, after they've been understood, after they've been accepted. But Stoicism flips that. You lead with self-respect, you lead with boundaries, and you never shrink them to earn belonging. Because anything earned through self-abandonment is not real belonging, it's performance. And performance is a cage. So what does this actually look like? It looks like telling someone, calmly, "No, I can't do that." It looks like leaving a conversation that disrespects your energy. It looks like not explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. It looks like choosing solitude over fake connection. It looks like saying less and meaning more. This is the quiet strength the Stoics talked about. Not reactive, not flashy, not aggressive, but immovable. That's what earns respect. Because when your kindness is backed by backbone, when your silence is intentional, not submissive, when your presence is rooted in principle, not popularity, people feel it. They may not say it, they may not clap for it, but they adjust to it. And that's where your power begins. Not in demanding respect, but in embodying what cannot be ignored. Now here's the part that stings. Most people who don't respect you never really learned how to. Not because they're incapable, but because you taught them not to. Not with cruelty, but with softness, with compromise, with overgiving, with the constant, exhausting performance of kindness. But here's the good news. You can unteach them, and you do it with action, not revenge, not silence as punishment, not cold detachment. You do it with clarity. You draw the line once, and then you enforce it with peace. That's Stoic kindness. Not kindness that bends until it breaks. Kindness that chooses. Kindness that has a spine. Seneca said, "He who does not prevent a wrong when he can is encouraging it." Which means silence in the face of disrespect isn't neutral. It's permission. So if you're wondering why people ignore your effort, why your kindness feels like a magnet for mistreatment, ask yourself, what have I allowed? Because the world doesn't respond to what you deserve. It responds to what you demand, with your behavior, your boundaries, and your willingness to walk away. There's a moment in every kind person's life where they finally realize they've been over-explaining themselves to people who never intended to understand. And that moment is powerful, because it marks a shift from proving to preserving, from chasing approval to guarding peace, from being nice to being whole. That's the shift Stoicism trains for, not to be liked, not to be safe, but to be true. And when you become true, you stop being optional. You become magnetic in the way that only self-respect can create. You become someone people can no longer manipulate, but can finally respect. So here's what I want you to think about as we move forward. What would your life look like if your kindness didn't come at the cost of your self-respect? What would change if your no didn't shake in your throat? If your time wasn't treated like spare change? Because that's what we're going to explore next. How to turn your kindness into command. How to live with generosity but never self-erasure. How to become the person the Stoics admired, not agreeable, not soft, but principled and calm. And when you learn that, you'll never beg for respect again. You'll carry it with you. Let's begin with something uncomfortable, but necessary. The truth is, if you're too available to everyone, you'll eventually become invisible to them. Not because you lack value, but because you've never asked them to recognize it. See, in Stoicism, kindness is not weakness, but when it lacks boundaries, when it's given without self-command, it quietly becomes compliance. And here's what happens when kindness becomes compliance. People stop seeing you. They see your usefulness, your agreeability, your willingness to say yes when everything in you wants to say no. You become background noise in your own life, And the worst part? You start confusing that invisibility with virtue. You start telling yourself, I'm just being a good person, while your inner peace bleeds out in every direction. Marcus Aurelius warned about this. He said, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Translation? If you're exhausted by being walked on, it's not because people are cruel. It's because you've never told yourself the truth about your role in it. So here it is. Being kind does not mean being available. Being generous does not mean being open to exploitation. Being understanding does not mean tolerating what breaks you. There is a lie many kind people carry, deep in their subconscious. It goes like this. If I give more, eventually they'll appreciate me. If I stay patient, they'll stop taking advantage. If I'm just a little more forgiving, they'll finally change. But here's what the Stoics knew. You don't change people by tolerating them. You don't earn respect by absorbing disrespect. You don't get loyalty by offering yourself as a doormat. You get these things by standing in your values, unshaken. Now, let's talk about the kind of strength Stoicism builds. It's not performative strength. It's not the loud kind. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to prove. It's the strength of restraint, the power of knowing when not to speak, when not to respond, when not to explain yourself. It's the power of a calm no, of a boundary set without anger, of walking away with dignity, not because you're cold, but because your peace is too expensive to gamble. Seneca said, no person has the power to have everything they want, but it is in their power not to want what they don't have, and to cheerfully put to good use what they do have. And what do you have? You have your principles. You have your time. You have your presence. These are not bargaining chips. They are currency. Spend them wisely. So let me ask you something. Why do you keep over-explaining yourself to people who don't listen? Why do you keep proving your good intentions to people committed to misunderstanding them? Why do you keep apologizing for having limits? Because the world doesn't need more kind people who bend until they break. It needs kind people who are also grounded. Kind people who say, I love you, but this crosses a line. Kind people who say, I'm not angry, but I am done. Kind people who are clear, firm, and steady. That's the Stoic approach. You don't need to be cruel to command respect, but you do need to be centered, and you must stop giving explanations where clarity will do. Clarity like this doesn't work for me. I don't accept that kind of behavior. I choose peace, not chaos. No raised voice, no argument, just clarity. Because clarity doesn't beg, it doesn't negotiate, it stands. And that standing, that stillness, that's what gets remembered. That's when people feel the shift. Not when you start fighting for respect, but when you stop asking for it and start living like someone who already owns it. And that's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to prove you're good, the moment you stop twisting yourself to make people comfortable, is the moment they actually start to take you seriously. Why? Because humans are wired to notice scarcity. What's rare becomes valuable. What's constantly available becomes invisible. So if your time is always open, if your heart is always on the table, if your energy is always accessible, you're signaling that your worth is low, not in words, but in behavior. And Stoicism isn't about words. It's about action. It's about living your philosophy, not preaching it. So here's what I want you to remember. The most Stoic act of kindness is choosing peace over performance. When you stop needing people to approve of your kindness, when you stop needing them to validate your silence, when you stop adjusting your truth to avoid their discomfort, you become dangerous. Not to others, to the systems that once kept you small. That's why the world doesn't respect nice. Because nice bends. Nice stays quiet. Nice hides. But Stoic kindness? That's something else. It is fire beneath calm. It is clarity without cruelty. It is restraint rooted in wisdom. And when you live like that, people won't know what to do with you. They'll either rise to meet your standard or fade away. Either way, you win. And in the next part, we're going to get even more practical. How do you start today? How do you rewire your responses? How do you show kindness with strength, silence with power, and self-respect without apology? Because there's one thing left to master, and that's how to become untouchable in a world that profits off your self-doubt. Let's go there next. So what does it look like to be kind and still command respect? To live in this world with an open heart, but not one anyone can walk over? To be a person who gives freely, but never loses themselves in the giving? That's where we are now. Because everything we've talked about, every Stoic principle, every lesson from Marcus, Seneca, and Epictetus, it all comes down to this moment, this decision. The decision to stop living as a reaction and start living with intention. See, the modern world has a strange relationship with kindness. It praises it in theory, but in practice, it takes advantage of it. It loves soft people until they say no. It loves givers until they set a boundary. It loves support until it's withdrawn from those who abuse it. So if you're kind and the world doesn't respect you, you're not broken, you're not weak, you're not wrong. You're just misaligned with a world that doesn't yet understand kindness as power. And that's where Stoicism becomes your sword. Because the ancient Stoics didn't just sit around talking about virtue. They practiced it, especially in the face of mockery, betrayal, injustice, and chaos. They knew something we forget, that to be truly kind in a corrupt world isn't just rare, it's revolutionary. But revolution requires discipline. And here's how you start. First, you must let go of your need to be liked. Not entirely, just enough. Enough to stop reshaping yourself for approval. Enough to stop softening your truth just to avoid discomfort. Enough to let someone misunderstand you without needing to fix it. Because the moment you need their validation more than your own integrity, you've already sold a part of yourself. Kindness without self-respect becomes a transaction. But kindness with Stoic clarity, that becomes leadership. The second shift is this. You stop justifying your limits. There's no need to explain why you're unavailable, why you left the conversation, why you ended that relationship, why you didn't text back. Your boundaries are not a request for permission. They are a declaration of self-trust. People will challenge them. That's expected. But that's not your cue to soften. That's your cue to stand still and let the storm pass around you. And here's the most liberating part. When you stop explaining your standards, people have no choice but to accept them or walk away. Either response is peace. The third and final shift is perhaps the most radical. You give without attachment. That means you act from your values, not from a craving to be seen. You help not to be thanked, but because it aligns with your principles. You listen not to be liked, but because it's who you are. You forgive not because they deserve it, but because you refuse to carry their weight. This is what Epictetus meant when he said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it," because kindness backed by strength doesn't need announcements. It moves like water, quiet, powerful, unstoppable. And now, maybe for the first time, you realize you've been powerful all along. It wasn't your softness that was the problem. It was your silence in the face of your own erosion. It wasn't your giving that broke you. It was giving to people who had no intention of ever giving back. It wasn't your empathy that drained you. It was forgetting that empathy must first be directed inward. So what now? Now, you rebuild. You live the way Marcus Aurelius would, with calm presence and unshakable ethics. You respond the way Epictetus would, with detachment from ego and alignment with virtue. You reflect the way Seneca did, deeply, honestly, and without apology. And you stop living for the world's shallow version of kindness, because that version burns you out. But this version, the Stoic version, it rebuilds you. Let me tell you something most people never hear. The world may not respect kind people at first, but it never forgets the ones who stayed kind and became immovable. The ones who offered their heart, but never surrendered their spine. The ones who gave, but never bled themselves dry. The ones who walked away, not with bitterness, but with dignity, so loud it echoed. That's who you're becoming. Kind, not for credit. Strong, not for attention. Disciplined, not for applause. Free, not because the world gave you permission, but because you finally gave it to yourself. So when they try to test your silence, you hold it longer. When they try to provoke your reaction, you don't give them one. When they ask for what costs your peace, you say no, with love and without a second thought, because you've stopped trying to be a good person in the eyes of others. You've started becoming a grounded person, rooted in truth. That's the Stoic way. And it's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it is powerful. And in the end, that's the kind of kindness the world can't ignore. Not because it begs to be seen, but because it quietly becomes unforgettable. And so do you.